So I'm here today with Anna Middleton, multi-award winning, ever popular, Instagram famous hygienist and therapist based in London. She is an ambassador and partner to a number of integral dental organisations and brands, while also owning and leading her own business called the London Hygienist. And I'm really pleased to be welcoming her on our very first episode of the show. So thank you, Anna. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, thank you. Today's episode, we're going to be focusing on women in dentistry. We'll be learning all about Anna's inspiration for joining the industry, her journey through education, her start as a professional, and the creation of her business and brilliant social media presence. Hopefully we'll learn about some of the ups and the downs, and I'm sure we will pick up some real gems of wisdom from Anna along the way. So I think we're in for a real treat. Now, before we dive into your story, Anna, I would like to just provide a little bit of context about women in dentistry, especially as someone myself who used to be a secondary school history teacher. I do like to touch on some of the history. So we've come a long, long way from Lillian Lindsay, who was the first female dentist in Britain in the 1890s, who was initially refused even entry into the London Dental Hospital for her applicant interview because they argued that she would actually distract the male students. Now, she didn't give up in the face of her rejections. She managed to qualify in Edinburgh and become an award-winning dentist. Nevertheless, though, she was still meeting lots of disapproval from men in the profession who felt that she was actually taking work away from her male colleagues. But nowadays, there's been a huge shift, and female applicants to dental courses at university have actually risen year on year since 2007. And there is now a 72% difference between female and male applicants. So just to my first question, Anna, what was your inspiration for getting into the industry?
Wow. I actually originally pursued a career as a sound engineer and studied music technology. And it's funny how you're speaking about women in dentistry. At that time, I was actually the only girl in my class at college. So I was surrounded by budding bedroom DJs and rock stars. And I came from a very different background. I was classically trained. So it was quite interesting, that dynamic anyway, but we all became very close. And what I lacked in, say, technical aspects of digital music, the boys were able to help me. And then I helped them with sort of classical elements when it came to things like strings and the piano. But actually, as soon as I sort of finished college, I worked for an arts company for a short period of time. And I just didn't really feel that I'd found my actual passion, and music will always remain a hobby. I also was very passionate about wanting to study again, but at the time I had responsibilities. I couldn't just jack everything in and go to uni. You know, I had a house, a car, a dog, a job. I had bills to pay. But I really wanted to study again. I wanted a career and not just a job, because I was also then still working in hospitality. So I decided to become a dental nurse. And that's sort of where it all started, because my first day at work, I was popped in with the hygienist to start learning sort of cross infection and how a surgery operates. And she became my inspiration, you know, and I'll hold my hands up. And I've told this story before. I actually didn't know what a hygienist was until I started working as a dental nurse. I'd never been to see one myself. And I found it fascinating. And it was as if, just, I know as cliche as it sounds, you know, the stars aligned. And I knew at that moment that is what I was going to go on to do.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about, not necessarily seeing the hygienist yourself before, because I saw that when you were talking about your own inspirations for setting up your business, a large part of it was about access to hygienists, because I know that there is an element of who can access that. So take us through how you then took that first role into an education process and into qualifying and things like that.
So I had a little bit of a hurdle to overcome. I didn't have the required A levels to get into uni to study hygiene. So I had my GCSEs, one of which was a GCSE actually in biology, and then the only AS level I had was in biology, and it was a C grade. So again, I think the only nuggets I took away from school were obviously music, and I was good at biology. I did everything I possibly could to help really strengthen my application for when it did come to applying for uni. I obviously passed my dental nursing, and at that time they still awarded various, you know, credits. I got a merit for mine, and I just fast tracked to learn as much as I could within the practice. So I very quickly became an implant nurse. I was the fire marshal. I was the first aider. I was left to cash up the practice if the manager was away. I did my radiography training. I did it in 3 months independently so I could sit the exam on time, ready to apply. And then I think when it came down to writing my personal statement, I had to really lean on the fact that I was 26. So I had 10 years of essentially professional working experience in a various number of roles and other academia to my name that could demonstrate that one, I was driven, one, I was capable, and that I was determined no matter what to get in. Obviously, needless to say, it worked. I did get in, and I was actually offered 2 places at the time and accepted Eastman Dental Hospital as my chosen place of study.
That's brilliant. Interesting. So what was the inspiration, that moment when you say that it just clicked and the stars aligned? What was it that was that driving force for you being like, I really want to do everything I can to get into that position? Because like you said, you threw yourself into everything so that you could get that position at university. What was the shining light?
I think it was the fact that I knew at this stage, I know age is just a number, and I'm someone who, again, at whatever it was, 31 or 2, did my therapy degree. There's no age on education. However, I've had a job, at least 1 to 3 jobs at a time since the age of 13. And as well as, putting myself through school, through college, through, higher education. And it got to a point where it's the career aspect. I didn't just want a job anymore. And I saw the hygienist and how she was with her patients. And, they loved seeing her. There was this dynamic, it wasn't just you're here for treatment. It was, oh, how are your children? Oh, tell me more about your holiday. And, it was a nice day. I was used to working 14-hour days in hospitality, late night on music projects. So this was you turn out, everyone's happy, you get the job done. She only did about 4 days a week, went on 3 exotic holidays a year. I thought, this is great. Let me sign up for this. And I liked the element that within like the sort of medical and particularly like the dental field, that no 2 days are the same. Each mouth is completely unique as well as every person. And I think that variety and the sort of pace is something that I thought, yeah, this is what I want to do.
Hmm. Yeah, I think especially coming from hospitality, I myself have done some of that. I used to be a chef some time ago, and that can be pretty intense in terms of the day to day and also the strange hours.
I mean, and this, you got to remember, this is before I'd even decided to start my own business. So just at this point, I was content with the idea of becoming a hygienist, working 4 days a week in a nice practice. So that was where the bar was at that stage.
Okay, interesting. So that was what you were aiming for. That was your goal. And then once you got to that, let's move on. What then took you into that position where you thought, actually, I think I could set this business up and I think I could do really well at it?
So it's always a real interesting one. Again, I knew I was on the right path. I qualified, I landed the jobs that I wanted to land. I was making the money I wanted to for a period of time, but I wasn't happy. And through a series of sort of events, things unraveled very, very quickly for me. I just couldn't find my feet. And there was a point when I nearly thought I have signed up for the wrong job. And my hopes and dreams were essentially shattered. And that was in the sort of first 6 months of qualifying. Um, but while I was at uni, I was sort of market researching around the whole direct access model because, I went in 2013 where, some of those barriers were lifted to allow patients access. And I thought, well, this will be a thing one day. And then I just Googled London Hygienist, nothing came up. So I bought the .com, bought the .co.uk, swiped up all the social media handles and just thought, we'll come back to this at some point. And I think once those series of events that happened, particularly one, sort of major event, but like professionally, that's then when I said, why, let's make London Hygienist the thing. We can't just sort of sit around. You clearly aren't really fitting into other people's models and other people's boxes. So now it's time for you to push forward. And again, I feel as if it was all meant to happen, and it, that sort of divine timing and the universe and looking back now, it happened for a reason, and I've taken that opportunity and run with it to where I am now.
Yeah, interesting. So what was it that was so difficult with fitting into someone else's business, if you don't mind me asking?
I think for a long time, what happened is I wasn't able to do my job properly in the way that that I was being sort of asked to work. It was short appointment times. It was high needs patients. There was no nursing support. These made it, burnout became a regular occurrence. And then I was someone who'd come from team backgrounds. Bearing in mind, I've worked in hospitality where you work as a team. I've worked on music projects where you have to work as a team. I've played in an orchestra. You got to play as a team.
Hmm.
So I was always someone that was kind of coming up with ideas, and I worked at a particular place where I wasn't getting paid very well, but I saw an opportunity to grow there, so I took it. Was seeing about 3 people a day, and so just through a bit of sort of tweaking and coming up with some ideas, I grew that to 8 patients a day within 3 months. However, every time I then went and asked for, say, for example, a pay rise or some support or a few other little things, maybe some new instruments, the goalposts kept moving, and it
Hmm.
was really disappointing. And then I had all the sort of hard work that I'd done turned round against me and made to seem like some bad guy. It was a really toxic working environment, but it was the end of one chapter and the start of a very new one, because I knew I had the ability to grow something. And once I'd sort of licked my wounds a little bit, I decided to just put myself out there.
Fair enough. No, it's really interesting hearing about, your confidence in yourself and your ability to throw yourself into things. And I think burnout and feeling a toxic environment is something that lots of people face. And then this moment happens where they either decide, right, I'm going to just stick in here and start growing resilience to this pain, or I'm going to actually just jump and make my own thing. And that's what loads of people are doing in lots of different industries. And I guess what I'm interested to find out about is, what role did mindset play for you in that moment where you said, okay, I'm going to do this? What did you kind of lean on in terms of resilience to make
I,
this happen?
I'm glad you've asked that, because the truth is, it came from a place of darkness. I had nothing. The places I was working, I lost my job pretty much overnight. It was just before my 30th birthday. I'll never forget it. And I was due to fly to New York the following week. And it essentially like ruined my birthday, because I thought, oh, I'm gonna come back. I don't have a job. The way I was sort of treated and what happened actually really scared me as a young professional woman. And it really just played on my mind, because at that time as well, my family all live abroad, was on my own living in London. I'm thinking, how am I going to pay for like my rent? All these things are running through your mind, and at this point you're already down as it is. And it was one of those where, taking that step back, I did locum work for a week, so I knew I had a little bit of money to tide me over, and when I came back I knew I could lean on that as well. And it did just sort of come out of a thing of, no one's going to fix this but me. So it was essentially just a sort of one foot in front of the other. So it was like, look, don't panic about permanent work, just locum for a bit, focus on your sort of physical health and your mental health. And then I sort of thought, okay, let's get people talking about London Hygienist. So that's when I started writing articles for industry, who are always open to receiving content from professionals. I started showing up to every single dental showcase or networking event, because I had no dental friends. And it was funny, because I quickly became the sort of hygienist that was hanging out with the cool dentists. And obviously everyone knows I work with Rona Askanda, who has built an extremely successful business and brand. I used to be her dental nurse when I was studying, and she herself was not too far out and had her own troubles. So we sort of bonded with our sort of trying to find our feet and progressing. And that was it. It just sort of, just one foot in front of the other, really. And then I was very fortunate that that work that I was doing on social media with promoting the brand, Philips, saw what I was doing, and they signed me for their Shine On campaign, which involved several other rising stars, as well as key players who were already carving out pathways for hygienists and therapists in the UK. And it just sort of snowballs from there. So if anyone is obviously listening and they're thinking, I'm going through my own sort of personal hell, just sort of take that step back, focus, it is very much getting your ducks in a line. So fix home first, make sure home is, happy and a place where you can come back to, and then just one foot in front of the other, really.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant advice. I mean, a lot of people nowadays are talking about how so many people get worried about this thing that's in the future that may or may not happen, typically doesn't the way that you've been thinking, because your imagination is far more rampant than the actual reality. And so when you just reduce down that panic into 24 hours, let's say, and you just say, right, what can I do right now in this situation? Then all of that anxiety and stress of the future disappears. And actually, that's where you take the action to get step to step.
And that's the thing, we always think of the worst possible outcome first and not the best possible outcome. And it's something that I really am passionate about, not only when I talk to other people about it, it's something I have to constantly remind myself about as well. Doing the self-work helps massively as well, reading books. I think for a long time I wanted to understand why my mind works the way it works, and reading things like the chimp paradox has been sort of life changing, and I don't say that lightly. And yeah, I guess it's, if you make room to self develop, that then spills out into your personal life, your professional life, and can sort of often make, when we're in a high pressured working environment, which we are in our role, help you sort of get through the day, but also not overwhelm yourself, and actually be able to enjoy your job and your life.
Mm. Yeah, let's move on to your business then. Let's talk particularly about Instagram. I think it's important because that's been an integral part of your business. I mentioned at the beginning that you're like Instagram famous and all this kind of stuff. It's an amazing platform that you're using so effectively. What kind of role do you think is played, and how have you managed to utilize it?
I think at the time, it was one of the sort of newer platforms that were available, and myself, along with a host of other professionals, saw that gap and managed to infiltrate and capitalize on it at an early time. Now, if we take it in, for example, something in comparison, say like TikTok, which is obviously the new platform where most people are spending their time, there are other people who jumped in on that at the very beginning and are TikTok famous far beyond even the Instagram following that I have. And on there, I have, I've got 100 followers on TikTok. So I think what it really shows is actually how digital communication has evolved so rapidly, and it is the place where people are sourcing their information. Now, a couple of years ago, before TikTok, I remember doing a talk and saying that by something like, I think I even said by 2022, 80% of content that will be, received by people will be video content. And as we can see now, the sort of Instagram premise of just nice curated pictures no longer plays a role, and now everything's video. You stand on a tube, a train, a bus, everyone is watching something on their phone, and quite often you'll notice it's video and they've got the subtitles on, so even without sound, news is being delivered in the same way. It's just, that's how digital has moved. So it's almost you've got to constantly stay up to date and think about it. Now, the way social media helped my business grow was the fact that I was using it as a call to action, was using things like before and afters to incite people to have a, look at their own mouth or think, oh, wow, I didn't know that's what a hygienist could do. Or, oh, wow, that was just staining. I can, I want to book in for that. I also felt very passionately about correcting mismessaging that was out there. So often, you'll see those deemed as influencers or people with large followings, perhaps pushing out information and knowledge that could be detrimental. And that was, again, a gap that I saw for me to jump in and say, hey, actually, that's not ideal, that's dangerous. And then obviously that allowed me to then branch out into some more consumer press opportunities again. And the whole time trying to raise the profile of what a hygienist does, and then obviously now what a therapist does, because even someone like myself didn't know back at a time when I probably could have started seeing a hygienist to maintain my oral health and, again, my overall health.
Mm. Yeah, I think one thing that's very interesting about Instagram and TikTok is that it's all about what value you can provide. So you were saying that you're dispelling myths essentially, and it's all about what value can you give to your audience and they appreciate it as opposed to what you can get in return for it. I think that's a really important shift. And I think one thing that's really interesting about TikTok when you say people really blowing up is that it's less about how many followers you have and it's more about the quality of the content, and it's that can just go spiraling and like go viral much more easily than Instagram used to, which was much more reliant on what your numbers already were.
It's really interesting though when you look at things that do go viral. Like, let's just say, for example, when I put up quite an important message about oral health or something, that just no one wants to hear it, kind of thing. If I put up a picture of myself or a video, or I create a funny meme, that then outperforms, the sort of way in which we were creating content. So it's really interesting. The other thing as well is, who is your market? Who are you trying to appeal to? It's great if you have, for example, hundreds of thousands of followers, but if they're, of a particular age range, they may not be the demographic of the clientele that would come to see me, or, for example. But I guess it's being able to have that sort of presence, that voice. And I guess healthcare professionals are becoming the sort of new influencers, because the public also are starting to see that they're the ones to be trusted.
Mm.
Well, I
Yeah,
hope anyway.
I think so, definitely. You can learn so much from all the different healthcare experts, and they're actually speaking directly to you through your phone.
I think there's a difficulty there, because sometimes you do see things and you're still a bit like, I'm not necessarily always saying, maybe it's when we look at maybe how different global markets work and how different professionals work, but it's just a very delicate space to sometimes be in, because also once it's out there, that is it, it's out there. So you need to make sure that anything that does go out there, you're able to defend and that you're happy, because you don't want to get yourself into hot water as a professional, obviously.
Hmm. Yeah, and some people just put pictures of, videos of real close-up sounds. You know, those ASMR of like Invisalign getting popped in, and it sounds kind of nice. Um, okay, brilliant. So the next thing I just wanted to ask was, and this is probably the last question that I'll really ask, is what advice would you give to, I was going to say young people, but actually just the people of any age, based off what you were saying, who either have a dream of following, the kind of professional path that you have, or someone who's actually following where you are and maybe has thought, I'm in a toxic situation and I want to move. What kind of advice would you give to those people?
Okay, so let's start with the ones who are thinking about getting into it. I think to have a deep understanding of what the role is that you're getting into before you go for it. Okay, because I think a lot of people want to get into, say, dentistry or become a hygienist or therapist, but then the reality is a lot of them, leave quite quickly afterwards. They either don't finish uni, and I've met, people on my course, or they qualify and then quickly change into something else. So I think making sure that you really fully understand what you're signing up for, whether that be through making sure, going and shadowing at a dental clinic or talking to a few other professionals. I had a deep understanding of dentistry. I'd always been taken to the dentist as a child, and I've had a whole array of dental procedures carried out, so I knew what was going on there. And then I think for those who feel that they're in a sort of potentially a toxic place, or they're not happy, I'm a very problem solution based person. So I think it's all very well to say I'm unhappy, but if someone was coming to me, I'd say to them and say, okay, well, can you articulate what it is that's making you unhappy? And then secondly, can you now tell me what you need, or what would help you to feel happier? So, let's say, for example, I was a practice owner and a staff member came and said they weren't happy. I'd want to know what I could do. But the only way that can happen is if they can articulate it, and I think it's really important because then you open up a space to say, hi, can we have a conversation about this? So it allows that sort of a little bit of a back and forth rather than being emotional or upset. You're saying, look, I don't want to throw the towel in. I want to stay here. However, I'm really struggling with the appointment times, or I'm really struggling without a nurse. At least come and show willingness. If it doesn't work out, then at least you've tried, and then it's time to start making an exit plan. There are lots of progressive practices out there and practice owners. It can always be scary and daunting to walk away from something, but just remember, I didn't walk away from something. I was essentially fired and had everything taken away from me, and I still bounced back. So even if it's a thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to leave in 6 months' time and I'm going to take a month or two off, start saving, just put a little bit back, work on the exit plan. But it has to come from a place of like structure, and you have to think about what your ideal day or life looks like.
There is one last question that
Go on.
is remembered, which is we must talk about access, I think, because we
Yeah.
did touch on it briefly, and I know it's something that's important to you. So I guess, why is it important to you, and what things are you doing to make changes in that area?
I mean, I think it's such a fantastic model, and it's something that other men and women in our industry have worked really hard for us to achieve with direct access. Often, seeing a hygienist, you will see them more, for example, than you maybe do the dentist. I don't know, we may seem a little bit less scary to some people. I think we have the opportunity to spot things quicker. I was at a talk recently, and things like just even screening for oral cancer. The fact that we're able to sort of do that and refer patients on a correct pathway. Also, I have had toothache myself in the past, and anyone listening who's had toothache knows that it is excruciating, and you would never, one, want to go through that again, or two, you at least have the sympathy and empathy to realize what that feels like. So again, if we're creating a space in which we can get patients in through the door, treat them within our scope of practice, but also if we aren't able to treat them because of our scope, we're able to be the person that can then refer them on and triage them on to the right professional to help them. And I think that's just really important. It improves workflow. It improves, the profession's morale, because we're doing the things we like. We're using our scope of practice, but equally, we're gonna hopefully eventually be able to eradicate, some of these dental diseases that we know are entirely preventable.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for today, and I really, really appreciate having you on. We've touched on loads of interesting things. I think there's lots of interesting things, in particular about mindset and social media, that people can hopefully pick up on. So I really, really do want to say thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Okay. Have a great day, and I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers.